Joined in studio now by security analyst Yaakov Lapin, who's also the host of the Lapin Assessment, as well as dperry, international affairs analyst, as well as the former Europe and Middle East editor for the Associated Press. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us on the Rundown this evening. A lot of celebration in Israel based off of yesterday's meeting and the statements between the two leaders, except for one of the statements, that being when it comes to Turkish President Erdogan. A lot of praise coming from Trump, also sometimes almost putting words into Netanyahu's mouth, saying, he's kind of on the same page with me here when it comes to Erdogan. Is this something that needs to be considered then when we talk about these major questions still left in Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the areas where there is clearly disagreement between Trump and Netanyahu. No matter how much Trump might deny it and express certitude that Netanyahu will play along, Israel has grave concerns about Erdogan of Turkey with very good reason, both in terms of its desired hegemony in Syria and its willingness to take part in what's happening in Gaza. Turkey, under Erdogan, is not a big friend of Israel. I think our viewers know very well. And on this issue, there could be consensus in most Israeli studios, and also, I think, among anyone who understands the Middle East. The bigger question is what can be done and who can disarm Hamas. There is justifiably pleasure in Israel across the board, not just among the Netanyahu crowd, that Trump says Hamas must disarm. In my view, nothing can possibly happen until Hamas is disarmed. There's no version of stage two, not the reconstruction, not the peace talks, not the Israeli pullout that can happen without Hamas disarming. But where I would differ from some people who appear on Israeli television is that I see there's only two options. One is the IDF does it, and that's a resumption of the war. And it would be easier this time because there's no hostages, no living hostages. Israel fought the war with one hand tied behind its back, despite the great damage and death toll and so forth. The other is a different narrative altogether, where the Palestinian Authority, in one version or another, is made a partner, and Hamas is more likely to agree to some arrangement where they hand over at least some of their weapons to the PA, which is the only other brand that exists in Palestinian politics that is realistic. Now, this Israeli government won't do that, or at least has shown every sign that it won't. This may change as the elections approach, and the need to placate the far right is less important than the need to show some successes to the Israeli public. But this government, for the full 3.5 years of its tenure, has been truly agitating against the PA, including with absurd messaging points like they're as bad or worse than Hamas, which just carried out a global historic massacre. Complex picture, to be sure. But bottom line is, even though Trump is wobbly on exactly whether Hamas disarmament needs to block all progress, he's still calling for it. He called out the Arab nations as being responsible for this. And he gave Israel a whole bunch of other little prizes, including carte blanche almost on Iran and absurd praise of Netanyahu, who apparently is the reason Israel still exists.
That's what he said multiple times. Joined now by Yigal Delmoni, the founder and board member of AFJS, that's the American Friends of Judea and Samaria. Yigal, thanks for being with us on the program today. I know you operate at this intersection of Israeli settlement policy and U.S. politics. So when the U.S. president presses Netanyahu to calm the West Bank, how do you read that pressure, how it actually impacts what's happening here in Israel?
Israel belong, and the Jewish belong to the land of Israel, and Judea and Samaria is part of the land of Israel and strong believe in the Bible. And there are no other solution in Judea and Samaria. The only solution is to put Israeli sovereignty on that area. We will bring 1 million Jewish people to live in Judea and Samaria.
All right, Yigal Delmoni, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I want to come back here in studio now and get your perspective, dperry, versus what we just heard and what we heard from the U.S. president himself also, who says settlement expansion could cost the Abraham Accords and the future for this region. So what do you make of the U.S. president's statements?
There are two ways to look at Israel policy in the West Bank. One is a security policy where Israel feels it must have security control over the region and that to pull out of the West Bank in its entirety would be a great danger because Hamas, or even worse, ISIS, Al-Qaeda type elements could take it over. And it's much closer to central Israel than Gaza was. It would surround Jerusalem on three sides and come within 25 miles of Tel Aviv. Clearly dangerous to simply pull out. On the other hand, the current Israeli government stands for political forces in Israel that would basically continue controlling all of it and continue settling in the middle of all of it, making it eventually, if Mr. Delmoni's lamentable view comes about, making it inseparable from Israel. And that means incorporating into Israel another 3+ million Palestinian Arabs. With the addition of over 2 million Israeli Arab citizens, that makes Israel 40% Arab. He has no answer to that. The idea of Israel taking over the West Bank fully is demographic suicide. And by the way, a lot of these geniuses also want to take over Gaza. With that, you already lost your Jewish majority altogether. So the question is, how you square this circle and which of these things you prefer. It won't surprise you to hear. I would rather come up with security arrangements, restructure the border to make it more palatable to Israel, but find a way to partition Israel from the 3 million plus Palestinians of the West Bank.
All right, Dan Perry. And Dan, a strong defense of Israel here, yet the United States not actually recognizing Somaliland itself. The defense is one thing, but is the United States likely to follow Israel's suit? What are the diplomatic and security decisions that the U.S. needs to weigh here?
Well, I mean, it would be foolish to try to predict what the U.S. does under Donald Trump. But it's no coincidence that Israel is the only country so far to have recognized Somaliland. The African Union and the Arab countries very much oppose this, putting them in the ironic position of sort of sanctifying borders imposed on Africa and the Middle East by colonial powers. And the reason they do this is because so many of these countries, including the main ones themselves, have potential separatist regions. Ethiopia has Tigray, Nigeria has Biafra, Cameroon, Congo. They would all fall apart if the idea of secessionism were to be rendered okay and widely acceptable. By the way, it's also the reason why the world was not too excited about the Catalan separatist movement or the Basques or even Kosovo. Now, Somaliland is different from Palestine. Let's not pretend. This was the case of a supposed unitary country. Now, that's a bit of a fiction, too, because there's different tribes. But the idea was Somalia was a country where there was nothing specifically different about Somaliland versus the rest of the country in the way that the Palestinians are obviously different from Jewish Israel. But they do have a different past. What is now Somaliland was ruled by the British. What is Somalia, Rump Somalia, was ruled by the Italians. And Somaliland, despite being recognized by no one, is way better governed. Now, where this becomes a security issue is that Somaliland essentially is the southern land on the Gulf of Aden, which takes us back to Yemen. The Gulf of Aden is very important. It leads to the Bab el-Mandeb, which leads to the Red Sea, which leads to the Suez Canal. 1/4 of global maritime container trade goes through there. The Houthis have badly disrupted it. The Houthis used their control over the Bab el-Mandeb to make a lot of trouble for Israel. And if Israel recognizes Somaliland, and if, let's say, Israel gets a forward base in the port of Berbera, looking across at Yemen, that would make a defense against the Houthis by Israel much, much, much more easy. Now, this is a strategic equation where we're looking at a potential chaotic state in this critical waterway. If Israel's also involved, and Saudis are, and the UAE is, and 3 different versions of Yemen are, wow.
But is this putting the cart before the military horse, it seems? Right now, it's just recognition. So how realistic is the scenario that not only Dan has been putting, but other Israeli analysts have been putting as well?
I think it's realistic. I'm not sure it's immediate, and let's acknowledge that nothing formal has been said, so we are obviously speculating, but there does seem to be a very transactional nature to this recognition. Israel needs a forward base in the Red Sea. It can't keep sending its missile ships and subs and even the jets 2,000 kilometers each time when it wants to put the Houthis in their place, when they're terrorizing Israeli cities with missiles, when they're trying to place a naval blockade and badly harming maritime traffic in Eilat, forcing ships to go all the way around Africa if they want to reach Israeli ports. We can't allow the Iranians to shut down the Red Sea. So placing a forward logistics, intelligence, naval base in that area would be a huge benefit. It would also, by the way, require that the Israeli Navy grow. The Israeli Navy, as it is, doesn't have enough ships to cover both the Mediterranean missions and the deep Red Sea missions that we're talking about. But it's been there before. There used to be an Israeli base in Sharm el-Sheikh. The Navy used to be much bigger than it is today. So I think that this is realistic. I think this is actually the intention. And I think that Israel is behaving more like a regional power by advancing this. And I think that the UAE also has a very important role to play. Going back to the last story, they are interlinked, of course. So it's unfortunate to see the UAE and the Saudis, which should be united against the Houthis and the Iranians, having this very severe feud. At the end of the day, I think it's in the interest of every sane country to shut down the Houthis, shut down the Iranian terrorization of the Red Sea, the piracy-like behavior, and to restore some semblance of order in this critical waterway.
And by the way, if they succeed, that would also be a favor to Israel's good friends, the Egyptians, who have suffered very, very badly, billions of dollars in revenue lost at the Suez Canal because of the Houthis.
Good news for a lot of people in the region, it seems. Dan Perry and Yaakov Lapin, thank you both so very much for being with us on The Rundown today.